Okay, let us continue. Oh boy. I still love it. Johann and Zach. The next day, Lutz brought Johann and another boy to the orphanage director's chambers. It was probably more accurate to call him a man, given that he was the same age as Johann, but he was still young enough for me to instinctively use the term boy. He had short crimson hair, styled in what resembled a crew cut, and his gray eyes had an aggressive, competitive glint. And in sharp contrast to his enthusiasm, Johann was looking fairly stunned. I was wearing my high bishop robes today. Up until now, he had thought that his patron was a rich commoner girl working with the Gilberta Company, and was now floored to learn that I was actually the tiny high bishop who had apparently been the talk of the lower city ever since the Star Festival. I could hardly blame him for being shocked. "Good morning, Lady Rosemine," Lutz said politely, speaking in the formal tone he reserved for nobles. Johann hurriedly dropped to his knees as well. "Good morning, Lady Rosemine?" He was looking at me with confusion, clearly not understanding my name change at all. I launched into the small speech that I had discussed with Lutz and Benno ahead of time. "My apologies for summoning you so suddenly, Johann. As you can see, I have been given the duty of High Bishop, and thus can no longer visit you myself so easily. I would ask that you travel here yourself when necessary, if possible, but I understand if that isn't feasible." "Oh, it is. I'll come. I'll walk here myself." "I would never suggest you come all the way to my workshop," Johann exclaimed. He was such an honest guy that he seemed to have concluded that I was an apprentice blue shrine maiden who had been sneaking out of the temple in disguise to walk around the lower city. Things went exactly as Lutz and Benno had said they would, which made me sigh in relief. That was much appreciated. Incidentally, Lutz, who is this with him? "Zach from the Bird Workshop. It seems like he would like to receive your patronage as well," Lutz said. I asked for more details and learned that Johann's metal litter types had been presented to the Smithing Guild alongside the tasks of other new smiths to great praise. Zach's work had come behind Johann's in second place, and apparently the title of Gutenberg had been placed a significant part in that decision. It made no sense that Johann would suddenly get so much praise after failing to get a patron and leaving his customers dissatisfied. "For so long," Zach said. "You just don't know the work other smiths can do, Lady Rosemine. I believe I am more suitable to the title of Gutenberg than he is. Please compare my work with his." As you can see, Zach is quite eager to become a Gutenberg himself. "I brought him here so that you may hear his case," Lutz said with a small smirk. The look in his eyes made it more than clear that he found Zach's eagerness to become a Gutenberg hilarious. It turned out that Zach was very confident in his skills and had some sort of one-way rivalry with Johann. I was more than happy to have such an enthusiastic craftsman join my legion of proud Gutenbergs. After all, the more skilled workers we had, the better. Before any decisions can be made, "I must see how talented you truly are, Zach. Shall we go to the workshop?" "Yes, my lady," Zach responded enthusiastically before shooting Johann a victorious look. I headed to the workshop with Lutz, Fran, and Daniel in tow. Gil was absent as he was taking the orphans to the forest. The gate guards recognized them now, which meant they could go on their own without Lutz or Tully accompanying them. Which is good. Once we had all gathered around a work table in one corner of the mostly empty workshop, in which only a few people were working, I took out some paper and ink to aid my explanation. "I would like you to build a roller for making wax stencils." "What are wax stencils?" Zach asked. This was Zach's first time doing a job for my workshop, and Johann's first time entering the workshop. So let's explain the production process while showing them a thin wax stencil, a printing press, and a stylus that Johann had made. So for mimeograph printing, you need paper so thin you can see through it. You then need to coat it with a super thin layer of wax, but that layer has to be even. That's what we need a roller for. "A roller like the thing I made before?" Johann asked. "No, not quite," I said with a shake of my head. I then looked over at Lutz, prompting him to read off a cheat sheet I had prepared so that he could explain what it worked in my place. "What Lady Rosemine wants is a machine used to spread wax. It will be composed of 2 rollers which are pressed against one another with a tray beneath them. You put the wax on the tray, then light a flame underneath to melt it, like this." Lutz showed them the rough sketch I had drawn before continuing his explanation. If you repeatedly turn the 2 rollers while the heated wax was below them, they would heat up to and get covered in melted wax. You can then slide a piece of paper between the 2 rollers, turning them just enough that the corners poked out the other end before piercing these corners with thin bits of wood similar to toothpicks. One person would then turn the handle on the machine, while the other person held the toothpicks and slowly pulled the paper out of the roller. The result will be a layer of wax so thin that it would dry while still suspended in the air, thus completing the wax paper. I apologize that I have nothing to offer but a rough explanation. I don't remember the details well enough to drop any blueprints. Lutz gave his explanation. Johann looked over my sketches with a thoughtful frown. Meanwhile, Zach was listening with shining eyes as if completely fascinated. Then started asking question upon question as he too started looking over the sketches. Lady Rosemont, as long as the machine still accomplishes what you want, would you permit me to change its shape? Of course, the important thing here is creating a machine that produces an evenly thin layer of wax. The appearance does not matter. In the end, we decided that they would come back with rough blueprints in 3 days' time. It would then fall on me to decide which design we would use. I'm going to become a Gutenberg no matter what, Zach declared, puffing out his chest. His gray eyes were burning so passionately bright that I could have sworn they'd turned silver. In response to the heated gaze from his so-called rival, Johann just shook his head with an exasperated expression. I don't want to lose my patron, so I'm going to focus on doing work that Lady Rosemont appreciates. But either way, I don't need the title. You can have it, Zach. Good luck out there. I mean, can she only have one person she's a patron for at a time? Because I would think that she'd be able to take both of them on as a patron, correct? The title of Gutenberg was purely symbolic, and Johann's dedication to results rather than appearances was exactly why it suited him perfectly. I could only hope that all of my workers would be so humble and dedicated to spreading printing. But when I mentioned that, Lutz whispered something strange to me from behind. He said, Johann's not being humble here, you doofus. In the 3 days during which Johann and Zach were making the blueprints, I decided to pick the songs that Ferdinand would be playing in the concert so that I could put together a schedule for the program. To that end, I burst into his room and requested his assistance. Program? Come again? It's a printed document that lists the songs being played during the concert. Since we're holding this concert to gather money for the printing industry, I intended to sell printed goods once it's over. Each program is made using a single sheet of paper. The front will show a printed illustration while the back will list each song and its lyrics. The program will be like a movie pamphlet, and those who wanted to buy one could treasure it forever. In my explanation, Ferdinand started to firmly massage his temples. His expression made it clear that while he emotionally wanted to say that no program was needed, he had also rationally determined that it would be good to market the printing industry, while we had an easy opportunity to do so. Show me the finished program ahead of time. Consider it done. I guess I'll go for a full black and white illustration for the program's cover. After all, I don't want to end up screwing myself if the wax stencils aren't ready in time. Shall we prioritize songs that the audience will be familiar with, adding only 1 or 2 new songs, I asked. No, I would rather play new songs than ones I've played countless times before, Ferdinand replied. With that in mind, I ultimately wrote up a schedule containing 3 songs based on classical music and 2 based on anime songs with a break between the 2 genres. In total, 5 songs will be played. Good grief. Swear to me that you will never use Riarda against me again. I didn't ask Riarda to step in. She helped me out of sheer compassion. Personally, I had given up when I failed to convince you of what I had to offer, I explained. I hadn't expected Riarda to give him the final push, and I certainly hadn't expected Ferdinand to cave. If you don't stop Riarda as her master, then who will? Considering that not even you could refuse her, Ferdinand, there is no chance whatsoever that I could on my own. Otherwise, I would have read all of those books you bought me before coming here. Why did you agree to do this concert in the first place? I demanded with puffed-out cheeks. Ferdinand averted his eyes. Although I was ultimately forced into this by Riarda, I am a man of my word. I will do whatever I have promised to do. Oh, I know you will. You have my full trust there. When I returned to my chambers, I found Rosina playing the song she had arranged with Ferdinand. The fact that she had arranged it with him apparently made her love playing it. She was acting like a girl in love, and whilst that was cute, I was honestly pretty tired of the song by now. I almost wanted to ask her to stop playing it. Go away!
Super Mario movie!
It's sitting on the couch! Have Nana help you with it! I shall head to the orphanage to discuss the program, I said, needing Wilma to draw a full black and white stencil illustration of Ferdinand playing the Hirschspiel, both to draw his attention away from my true plot, and so that I had a backup in case the wax stencils were ready in time. And when I informed her of that, Wilma's light brown eyes shone with excitement. You may count on me. At the moment, I am overcome with such a powerful urge to draw that it feels as if Kunststeel, the goddess of art herself, is granting me her divine protection. Lady Rosemont, what manner of illustration do you need? Wilma asked before inviting me to her room in the orphanage, where she had apparently drawn several pictures of Ferdinand already. Oh no. As Samuel and Fran were men, I left them in the dining hall and headed to Wilma's room with just Monica and Bridget. Oh my, Wilma, these are spectacular, Monica cried out as soon as we stepped inside. They certainly are impressive, Bridget agreed. My jaw dropped as I looked around the room. It was filled with so many stacks. What the fuck? so many stacks of Ferdinand drawings that I genuinely couldn't believe my ears. Maybe she hadn't been joking when she mentioned that Kunststeel had given her strength. Kunststeel. Whatever. I cannot pronounce it for the life of me. I keep on thinking steel. I don't know. I just kept thinking of more angles and styles to draw him, and my hands simply couldn't stop. Wilma's heart had been stolen by... Oh no. Wilma's heart had been stolen by Ferdinand, and the resulting art fever was something to behold. Most of the paper I had given her for sketching had been used to draw him, and while I couldn't tell exactly how much, there was definitely some beautification going on. It was hard to deny that Wilma was looking at him through the rose-tinted glasses of a star-struck young girl. The real Ferdinand didn't shine anywhere near as much as he did in her illustrations, and he certainly didn't smile as much. Wilma and I were presumably looking at the same person, but we were seeing him in dramatically different ways. I'm not fixing it! Get Nana to do it! She knows how to work it! Golly! His expression does loosen up a bit when he's playing music, but he never smiles as gently as this. In fact, I reckon I'll die before I ever see him give a gentle smile at all. Wilma had done a number of drawings showing Ferdinand playing the harpsichord with Rosina, and while I was only going to sell illustrations of him by himself during the concert, they really were fantastic. Each one seemed to tell a romantic tale of a handsome man and a beautiful woman. She had also drawn him playing while I sang, and I immediately noticed that I looked about 30% shinier as well. It was as if the feather she was looking at Ferdinand through was so strong it even affected how she saw me when I was beside him. So you would like a full-body illustration of Ferdinand playing the harpsichord cut into stencils? I can finish that at once. Please come for it tomorrow afternoon. I had never seen Wilma so full of life before. It was honestly kind of scary to think that Ferdinand had made her go from being afraid of men to whatever this was. I had to accept that there would be women passing out or just completely losing their minds at the harpsichord concert. In order to minimize any potential damages, it would probably be necessary to get the Knights Order involved so they could stop any rampaging fans and carry any collapsing women to the nearby medical room. Wilma's prediction that she could have the illustration finished at once proved correct, as the stencil was ready the next day. It was a full-body picture just as I had ordered, and in all honesty... It looked like she had put a lot more care and effort into it than she had the picture book illustrations. How is it, Lady Rosemine? Wilma asked, her eyes brimming with satisfaction despite it being clear from her face that she had barely slept last night. I think it's spectacular. Once I have Ferdinand's approval, I will send it to the workshop to be printed at once. When I showed him, Ferdinand expressed his satisfaction through a contented, "This will do." I had now managed to secure his permission to use the illustration for the program, but I had a feeling this was only because it wasn't a clear-cut picture of him. In fact, had it not been for the hairstyle and the general atmosphere surrounding the illustration, it might not have been recognizable as Ferdinand at all. Before I knew it, it was time for Johann and Zach to submit their blueprints. They would be bringing them to the workshop, and as I was waiting there with Daniel and Fran, behind me, Grey Priests were starting to print the programs. We would be using the same method to print the illustrations as we had used previously, but this was to be our first time printing using metal letter types. To that end, the priests were all tightly knitting their brows in concentration as they picked up the types and awkwardly lined them up on the stick. Lady Rosemine, I have brought letters from the Gilberta Company and the Smiths, Gil announced. Thank you, Gail. May I see your blueprints then? With hunched shoulders, his head dropped a little. Johann took out a board. On it was a blueprint for a machine that looked and would supposedly work just as I had described, but it seemed that not even he was satisfied with it. The plan showed Johann's greatest weak point. While he could perfectly follow even the most detailed blueprints, he was bad at making his own plans based on customer needs. Zach, in contrast, victoriously took out several boards, each with a blueprint on it. He had come up with various unique approaches to the wax-cutting machine, and each one appeared to have its own virtues. They were made well enough that I could understand why he was so confident and had so many patrons. These certainly are impressive, I said. Yeah, I could never think up anything like these, Johann added gloomily. I couldn't blame him for hanging his head. Following the blueprints that Zach had drawn up would make the machine I wanted a reality. Since he had based them on existing techniques, they would apparently be a lot easier to make than what Johann had drawn up based on my description alone. Zach, which of these would you most confidently suggest to me? This one will probably work the best, but this one will be the most realistic to make, Zack replied. I looked over the 2 blueprints he showed me and asked Johann what he thought. His expression turned serious as he began comparing the 2. Once he had glared between them for a bit, he pointed at the one that Zack had said would work the best. Zack narrowed his eyes and glared at Johann. That one's not realistic. This part right here needs to be done so precisely that it'll be impossible to... Then why don't you both work on it? Maybe both work on the stupid thing? Johann slowly shook his head as he peered at the blueprint. The orange hair bundled in a ponytail behind his head shaking along with him. His face was full of confidence and his eyes shone with determination, and with a powerful nod he declared that he could do it. I clapped my hands once to stop Zack from leaping at Johann in anger. That kind of behavior would absolutely not be permitted in front of a patron. He stopped on a dime as he came back to his senses, then lowered his clenched fist. Now, I shall ask you each to make the machine you have picked. I intend to establish printing workshops in other cities as well, so having 2 functional wax machines will be entirely acceptable. However, I will not pay for something that does not work. Without any working examples to back up their arguments, any further debate was pointless. The competition would be settled once the products were completed. Zack glared at Johann with the heated look of a rival, but Johann just glared at the blueprints. You may bring your machine and set it up here when you are finished, but ensure that you speak to Lutz and come here through him. Gil, will there be space for the machines, I asked. And Gil pointed at a wide-open spot elsewhere with his chest proudly puffed out. We have plenty of space since we cleaned up. I say thank you. I have faith that you will both provide good work, I said. I had assumed that it would be the end of our conversation, but Lutz flashed a mischievous grin for just a second before taking out a letter. I looked up at him in surprise as he handed it to me. A hairpin craftswoman in our store has made a hair stick for you, Lady Rosemine, and would like to show it to you as soon as possible. Would you be able to meet with her sometime soon? Tully. He was talking about Tully. I could see her again. I gave a big, happy nod. Please bring her to the orphanage director's chambers tomorrow afternoon, I exclaimed, unable to hide the excitement in my voice. Lutz nodded in response, a small grin creeping onto his face. I did my best to keep my expression neutral as I exited the workshop with Fran and Daniel, but the moment I was outside, I heard Lutz burst into laughter behind me. He wouldn't be mean enough to say it would make her think it was Tully and it's not. As soon as I was back to my room, I read the letter from my family. Kamio was now able to roll over, and Mom was earning a stable income by making hairpins, which meant that she could stay at home and look after Kamio until he was old enough to not need someone like Gerda around. I was glad beyond words that he wouldn't have to suffer being neglected by Gerda like I had. Oh, I almost forgot who Gerda was. Gerda was the one who I think was looking after mine before, correct? Wow. Dad was busy working at the gates as commander, and he mentioned that Benno and the Guildmaster were frequently passing in and out of the city. Don't work them too hard now, he wrote. Tully said that she'd have the new hair stick ready when she saw me. I couldn't even begin to describe how excited I was to be able to see her soon. I immediately got to work on my reply. I wrote that Ferdinand was bullying me by stopping me from reading books, that I was glad they had come to see me during the Star Festival, that I had successfully performed the Starbind ceremony in the Nobles' Quarter, and that I was working hard to develop the printing industry in the temple. I folded the finished letter and slid it in between the pages of a finished picture book I intended to give to Tully. Then I had Rosina bundle it together with something that I had asked her to prepare earlier. Lady Rosemond, you're getting much too excited, Fran observed with a small grin as I squirmed in place. I knew in my head that I needed to act more like a proper noble girl, but I couldn't contain my excitement over seeing Tully again after so long. Lady Rosemond, I have brought our store's hairpin craftswoman, Lutz said in a polite tone as he entered with Tully. I wanted to rush forward and leap into her arms like I always used to, and I wanted to cry tears of happiness at getting to see her again, but we were forbidden from addressing each other as family. Tully was looking at me with the same tearful expression that I was no doubt wearing myself. Her lips trembled, but she swallowed the name mine without ever saying it. Thank you for seeing me today, Lady Rosemine. Here's the hair stick I made using a new style of stitching. Tully said before taking out a hair stick bundled in cloth from the tote basket I used to carry. She had drawn inspiration from the method of using hide glue that I had taught Lutz and made a large flower with freely moving petals and a rigid stem. It's beautiful. I'm always wearing the hair sticks that you made for me. As thanks for this new hair stick, I shall offer you this gift. I pray that it serves you well. I gave it a second in my line of picture books, this one focusing on the subordinate gods beneath the goddess of water, as well as a collection of sketches detailing the clothes I had seen nobles wearing at the Starbind ceremony, which I had asked Rosina to draw in return for teaching her the new songs I had taught Ferdinand. Hopefully they will help Tuli in her design studies. I am honored, Tuli said, probably having been taught how to speak to nobles by Mark and Benno. I had never heard her talk like that before, and it was as clear as day how hard she was working to grow. There is a baby in the temple's orphanage. He has started to crawl, and those taking care of him have noted how much of a handful he is. I would like to hear about any experience you might have with babies. Tuli paused for a moment and thought, then gave a small smile. I hope that the stories of my little brother Kanya will be to your liking. As of late, he has been spending much of his time looking at his black and white picture books. I am not exactly sure what he enjoys about it so much, but my mom usually keeps it spread out on the bed, leaning against the wall, and I always see him quietly looking at it on his own. Oh, it's so cute! On top of that, Camille had finally gotten big enough to hold onto the white rabbit rattle I had made for him. He could grab it and track where the sound was coming from with his eyes. May I bring you another hairpin when I finish one, Lady Rosemine? Yes, of course, I shall be waiting. We shared gifts, pleasant words, and smiles, and while it pained me that I couldn't touch her, Tuli's warm smile was enough to fill my heart with light. Oh. Elvira and Lampret attack. Uh-oh. Gil, Lutz, I would like you to print this on the program's back cover, I said, holding out the stencil that Wilma had made for me. It was the day after I had met with Tuli. Seeing her had warmed my heart, but the loud loneliness had already set in again, so I was clinging to Lutz in the hidden room. Gil and Daniel were the only other people with us. How many do you need? We'll be preparing 30 seats for attendees, so I guess we should make enough to accommodate people buying one to view, one to store, and one to share. That'll be 90 in total. Say what? That's way too many, Lutz yelped in surprise before shooting me a confounded look. I personally thought that 90 wouldn't be enough, though that was just a gut feeling. If we don't finish the wax stencil in time, then these programs will be the only printed merchandise we can sell at the concert. So I'm pretty confident that they'll sell well. Is that confidence founded in anything? If you're wrong, then we're wasting a ton of resources here, Lutz responded, shooting me a glare very similar to Benno's that he said he wouldn't permit any money to be wasted. He was becoming more like a merchant each day, and I couldn't help but feel proud. Oh, boy. Wilma and the other girls' obsessions say it all. Those who didn't come to the concert will wish they had them. Even if we don't manage to sell them all, their reputation as the first printed product means it won't be long before their price shoots up a crazy high. Maybe in like a few decades? Perhaps a century? A few decades? That doesn't prove your point at all. He barked back in disbelief. In my opinion, it was the most solid proof that one could ask for. But Lutz apparently just didn't get it. Either way, I was willing to compromise. We can print 90, or we can round up to 100. Go with whichever your heart tells you. Why is the second number even bigger? Lutz exclaimed. Really, though, I didn't think that 100 would be enough either. Gil, seeing that I wasn't about to budge on the issue, gave Lutz a slap on the back. Lutz, I don't think you'll ever convince Lady Rosemine to change her mind on this. I know that. I just needed to let it out to make myself feel better. As today was Daniel's day off, I couldn't go to my hidden room or visit the workshop, so I went to the High Priest's chambers with Fran and Bridget to help Ferdinand with his work. He had taken on most of my High Bishop work, so I pretty much just ended up helping him do a small portion of the stuff that was supposed to have been done by me in the first place. It seems that our expenses for summer are much lower than they were for spring. Though our income has gone down a bit too, I observed. What other reason could there be for that than the High Bishop being replaced? Ferdinand replied without even lifting his head from the paperwork. But I couldn't understand how that alone would make such a dramatic difference. What exactly was the old High Bishop using all of this money on? He could not distinguish the temple's money from his own. But if you wish to know everything that he secretly spent the money on, I am afraid that not even I know the full extent of his embezzling, Ferdinand said, briefly glancing my way before looking down at his work. Ferdinand had only started managing the temple's finances about 2 years ago. He had inherited the position of High Priest after his predecessor left for the sovereignty, and they had apparently been in a terrible enough state to make him feel dizzy. When it came to ability, the blue priests who had been raised in the temple and had lazily passed their days without putting much effort into anything were leagues below Ferdinand, who had been educated in the Royal Academy and trained to be the Archduke's right-hand man. Sounds like you had it rough, Ferdinand. I intend to make the temple budget clearer and properly managed while you are the High Bishop, Ferdinand said, just as an ordonnance flew in through the window. It circled the room once, flapping his wings, and landed on Ferdinand's desk. Nobles used ordonnance, flying bird-shaped from face stones, to communicate. They are apparently simple to use, and something that a student of the Royal Academy can master before the end of their first year. As such, children who were too young to attend the Royal Academy would have to communicate through their guardians. In my case, that was Rayarda while I was in the castle, Ferdinand while I was in the temple, and Elvira whenever I was at home. If someone needed to send me a message, they would send an ordonnance to one of these three depending on where I was. Lord Ferdinand, it's Lamprey. My sincerest apologies, but I request a meeting with Rosemine. There is a small matter regarding Lord Wilfred that I would like to briefly discuss with her, the ordinance said, 3 times in Lamprey's voice before returning to the shape of a face stone. Oh yeah. Wilfred was calling me unfair or something before I returned to the temple. Maybe it's about that? I can't think of anything else it could be. Rosemine, when will you be available for a meeting? Ferdinand asked. I personally didn't mind when the meeting was held, given that it was just supposed to be a brief conversation. But in the world of nobles, you couldn't just say that now was a good time. Ferdinand had always scheduled a date around 3 days in the future whenever I requested a meeting with him. Well, I suppose 3 days from now will do? Agreed. Now then, face the bird and speak. Ferdinand made his wand appear, then lightly tapped the face stone while saying ordinance to make it twist into the shape of a white bird. I faced it as instructed and immediately felt a small wave of nervousness wash over me. It was like I was leaving someone a voicemail. Lamprey, it's Rosemine. I shall be awaiting your visit 3 days from now in the afternoon. Once that was done, the ordinance flew away. I had assumed that would be that, but then it returned in the blink of an eye. Can the meeting be before noon? I don't get to see you very often, and I would like to share lunch with you afterward. It seems that Mother wants to join us too. It seemed that the whole thing about Wilfred was just a cover. His actual objective was meeting me for lunch. I imagine that Karstad or Cornelius bragged to him about the Italian restaurant, Ferdinand said with an amused smirk, which reminded me. Elvira had only ever eaten Ella's sweets, not her actual cooking, while Lamprey hadn't eaten neither. But their head chef was still learning the recipes from Hugo in the castle. The only way for them to eat the food would be for them to come and visit me, since I had Ella with me. I'll prepare the same menu that Father Eckert and Cornelius had, I replied in the ordinance, and a few minutes later, Lamprey sent back his thanks in a tone that leaked both his relief at getting what he wanted and his embarrassment that I had seen right through him. And so came the day of the meeting. Since Elvira was going to be joining us, I had brought one of the freshly printed programs for her to check, as well as several illustrations that Wilma had drawn. Ella and Nicola were working hard to prepare the food. They even had male helpers since we had been training some priests so that we could send them to the new orphanage in the monastery, which was useful as we wouldn't need to worry about them getting exhausted when it came to the more physically taxing parts of cooking. Hey, Rosemine. Oh my god, why did I say that? Rosemine, good to see you're doing well. Sorry about coming down like this. I was worried you might be sick, Lamprey said once Fran had guided him and Elvira into the room. They were both wearing bright smiles. Lamprey because he was looking forward to the lunch, and Elvira because she knew that Ferdinand would be attending as my guardian. It's good to see you well, Rosemine. I have no doubt that your good health is thanks to Lord Ferdinand's consideration. We truly are blessed to have him. Yes, you are. Once we had exchanged the lengthy greetings that all nobles gave, Lamprey and Elvira even were offered seats and a selection of tea. Nicola then carried in a plate of tea-flavored cookies, wearing an anxious expression as she sat it on the table. Lamprey eagerly leaned forward as I took the first sweet and bit into it. There was no escaping the noble tradition where hosts had to taste the food for poison. These are langues de chat. They're only light snacks, but as we are due to have lunch soon, please take care not to eat too many, I explained. No sooner had the last words passed my lips than Lamprey reached for a cookie. His expression looked so much like Cornelius's did whenever sweets were involved that I couldn't help but chuckle. Lamprey's scarf went down and widened his eyes. Has Cornelius tried these? No, this is the first time I'm serving these to visitors, so Cornelius has not had one yet. I see, Lamprey replied, brimming with smugness. Ferdinand took this opportunity to set down his tea and ask about the excuse that Lamprey had made to visit. Lamprey, what is this business with Wilfred that you mentioned? Lamprey gave a deliberate nod, then started to give a roundabout explanation full of vague, noble euphemisms. Ferdinand was nodding as he listened, but I couldn't understand a word. Excuse me, dear brother, but your language is simply too complicated for me to understand. Huh? Lamprey furrowed his brow, not sure how else to explain, so I looked toward Ferdinand. Wilfred thinks it's unfair that you're not being forced to study like he is, Ferdinand explained. Wilfred was apparently a ball of energy who spent his time running away from his tutors and from his perspective. I was getting to walk around without tutors and even leave the castle whenever I wanted. Lamprey, I advise that you inform Wilfred just how much of a fool he is being. Of course Rosemine is being tutored. I have been instructing her personally while she is at the temple, and now that she is also being educated in Karstad's estate, she is waiting for Wilfred to learn the alphabet. Sylvester had seemingly decided that Wilfred would benefit from having a rival, given how much of a sore loser he was, so I was going to be learning history and geography with him once he had memorized the alphabet. I don't mind studying all day, as it means I can read books. Please tell Wilfred that I am eager for him to learn his letters as soon as possible, I said, causing Lamprey to cradle his head. You two are never going to get along, he sighed. I found it hard to disagree. Wilfred wanting nothing more to avoid studying, while I was willing to spend days or perhaps even weeks holed up in my room reading books. But considering that I was currently being denied access to a stack of exciting books, I was actually more envious of Wilfred's situation. Given that the Archduke is pressing us for details about his son's studies, we can only hope that Lord Wilfred learns them soon. If possible, I would like Rosamund to study with Lord Wilfred, even just once in the meantime, so he can see just how enormous the gap between them is. She does not have the time for that, Ferdinand replied, as the manager of my schedule, immediately shutting down Lampert's request for my help. There is much that Rosamund must accomplish post-haste. She has to practice magic in preparation for when she gathers the ingredients she needs, perform her duties as the High Bishop, and run the orphanage and its workshop, not to mention stay healthy in general. Wilfred's success ultimately comes down to him and those around him, if it's not Rosamund's job, but rather yours as his retainer. Lampert was sitting with his mouth agape. Lord Ferdinand, is that not too much work for her? She is but a child, one who has only just been baptized. And that is why I refused your suggestion. Do not give her any more work than she already has. Having Ferdinand list out everything that I needed to do made me feel even more busy than I actually was. I was pretty much just doing what he told me to, and since I was forbidden from working myself, I usually used to leave the actual work to other people. When coupled with the fact that I never passed out in the temple because Fran was there to manage my health, I really didn't feel that busy at all. In Rosamund's case, I know that she will consume and take in knowledge from whatever books are placed in front of her, without needing to be prompted, so her studying can be done during her spare time. What? No, please, give me more time to read books. My spare time isn't enough, I protested, only to have Ferdinand quickly shoot me down. With a dismissive sneer, it seemed that I couldn't expect him to show me any consideration. So mean! Aside from the studying, it seems that Wilfred finds it unfair that only Rosamund gets to talk with her father at the dinner table. Dinner at the castle involved us discussing what we had done that day, and since Wilfred was always slipping out of class and running around the castle, most of his time at the dinner table was spent being scolded by his mother while Sylvester watched on without saying anything in particular. I had guessed that Sylvester couldn't scold his son in good conscience, since he had done the same as a child, but neither could he support the bad behavior, so he had no choice but to remain silent. I suppose I do have conversations with him, but that's because I need to report on the printing business. Perhaps Wilfred should be given some work of his own to do, I suggested. Kids his age from the lower city would already be starting apprentice work. Maybe he would learn to be more responsible if he was given some simple jobs to do. Also, isn't Wilfred progressing quite slowly for someone his age? A child of a merchant would already know how to read and write before their baptism, and would be able to understand simple math. Even kids in the orphanage can do that. Do you not think it's a mistake to spoil him and only start teaching him after his baptism just because he's the son of the Archduke? I think it would have been better to start teaching him from a much younger age. Wilfred was taught from a young age and still learned nothing, which is precisely why Sylvester was so shocked when he toured your orphanage. That reminded me, Sylvester had been pretty surprised when he saw that the Carta and the picture books, but it seemed that his focus hadn't been on the products themselves, but rather on the kids who had learned to read them over a single winter. We had already proven that kids who studied using Carta and picture books learned incredibly quickly, but their progress depended on them having rivals to compete against, or at least friends to play with. It might increase the burden on Wilfred's attendance, but I will prepare a Carta deck for him. There is no need for you to take Wilfred's education upon yourself, Rosamund. Good grief, did I not just say that you were already overworked? Ferdinand asked with a frown, but even he had to agree that Wilfred's inability to read or write was problematic for everyone. It was pure coincidence that I would benefit by getting to study, and thus read books sooner. Fourth bell rang to announce the beginning of lunch, at which point Ferdinand stated that it was best for a family to eat together and return to his own chambers. Technically your family, dude. Lampert was chowing down faster than I had ever seen him eat before, and Elvira mentioned that she hoped our head chef would be coming home soon, so I could tell that they were both more than satisfied with the food. After lunch, Elvira and I began discussing the concert. It seemed that they were experiencing a serious ticket shortage. Her intention had been to only invite women from her own faction, but ladies from other factions had expressed interest as well. Many of them had never shown any prior interest in Lord Ferdinand, but now it seems they have all changed their minds, Elvira ranted, but it was only natural that the ladies would have avoided Ferdinand for their own protection, while Sylvester's mother was working against him. It seemed that those afraid of Veronica had kept a respectful distance from Ferdinand, rarely engaging with him in public. In other words, now that Veronica was gone, everyone who had been restraining their feelings was finally free to let them loose. How many seats should we add? Well, I imagine that just about every noblewoman in the city will be attending, so perhaps we should begin by rethinking where the concert is going to be held. There was roughly 300 nobles living in the noble quarter of Ehrenfest, counting only those who had been baptized. Jesus Christ. If we estimated about half of them to be women, then we were looking at 150 attendees. There would certainly be some among the crowd who weren't particularly interested in Ferdinand, but this was an event being held by a throng of archnobles. It was the fate of a lay noble to follow after those superior to them, so I can imagine that many lay nobles would be taking a hit from the ticket sales. Mother, I suggest that we add 30 more seats and then prepare a standing gallery at a heavily discounted price for everyone else. Having to stand while watching will provide an excuse for those who don't wish to buy tickets, and a standing gallery would mean that fewer lay nobles would need to break the bank to buy more expensive tickets. Those in the standing gallery will be attending the concert all the same, so they wouldn't be put to shame by the archnobles who recommended they attend. The price would be comfortably affordable too, thanks to the programs being sold separately. Watching while standing? The thought never occurred to me, Elvira replied. But the tickets certainly are expensive. It will be for the best to give those who can't afford them the opportunity to refuse. Of that done, I told Elvira which songs Ferdinand would be playing at the concert and showed her the finished program. It was using black and white art from a cutout stencil, but since that was still new technology here, she was head over heels for the illustration. I jotted down on my diptych that we would be needing a lot more copies printed. 100 more to be precise, so I continue oh dear, you're gonna scare Let's and them off. Uh-oh. Well, you have an explanation for that, though. The programs will be sold separately from the tickets, and the money we make from them will be added to our donations. Now I shall buy one at once. Buying this program is a form of donating. It's a moral, highly commendable act, is it not? Excuse me. Yeah, bullshit. You just want a picture of Ferdinand. Elvira said, her dark brown eyes gleaming with excitement. I could already imagine her going out of her way to buy every single illustration of Ferdinand ever released under the guise of donating to a good cause. Forgive me, Father. Forgive me. Oh dear, what's Karsten gonna... Does he not even think about... Never mind, he's used to this. He knows how Ferdinand... He knows how she is about Ferdinand, I guess. You sure come up with good ideas at the drop of a hat, huh, Rosemine? Lambert said in an impressed tone as he continued to shovel languid chat into his mouth despite having only just eaten lunch. I looked at him, then remembered the security problem that we were bound to have. Excuse me, dear brother. I would like for the Knights Order to station guards in the concert hall, but who should I ask to make that happen? Father? Or perhaps Sylvester? We will be hosting even more people than expected, which means that our need for guards are more urgent than I had thought. Knights in the concert hall? Oh my, for what purpose, Elvira asked. I believe that more than a few ladies will pass out from the excitement, or alternatively just completely lose control of themselves. I think we should even prepare a medical room to take them to. Hold on a second, Rosemine. This is just a Harshfield concert, isn't it? Lambert asked dubiously. I gave a nod. It is. I wouldn't have been worried either, had I not seen how women reacted to Ferdinand playing the Harshfield. Wilma and Rosina were both drooling over him less than a verse into his first song. It wasn't hard to imagine someone like Elvira, who was already obsessed with Ferdinand, just absolutely losing her mind. I think it would be easy for me to just demonstrate, I said before standing up from my chair, unfurling one of Wilma's illustrations and spreading it out for them to see. My, what do we have here? Allow me to take a closer look. Elvira abruptly stood up from her chair with a clatter and briskly walked to my side of the table. She still moved with grace and elegance, but her sheer speed was nothing short of intimidating. I looked at Lambert as I held out the illustration to Elvira. Imagine 100 ladies in a state like this. And think of the chaos that would ensue without the Knight's Order. I'll try asking Father. The resting room close to the large hall should be suitable for medical situations. Anything else you need? I would like you to prepare a stage similar to the one used in the Starbind ceremony to prepare the audience from getting too close to Ferdinand while he plays, because that'll piss him off. I thought back to the idol concerts on Earth and listed off whatever safety precautions and other bits of advice I could think of. Meanwhile, Elvira was sighing and gasping in awe as she pored over the illustration. Rosemine, may I have this? I intended to use that illustration as a base for printing once I completed the wax stencil, so I'll have to ask you to buy a printed version on the day of the concert. If I'm unable to finish the stencils in time, then you may have it. Very well then, Elvira said as she reluctantly handed back the illustration. She was staring at it so intently that I decided to give her a copy of the program just to keep her mind occupied. The printing business is all about reproducing exact copies of things en masse. We already have 100 copies of this program, for example, and I intend to make even more, so I ask that you encourage everyone to bring their money pouches and spend freely. Please, do your best to make this concert a success, dear mother. I was listening to a report on Johann and Zach's progress in my hidden room. They were gradually bringing new parts to the workshop, and the waxing machines were slowly coming together. While we were waiting for the machines to be finished, I asked Lutz and Gil to begin making wax that had just a bit of pine resin mixed into it to increase its pliability. How much is just a bit? Gil asked, but Lutz immediately put a hand on his shoulder. That means we need to experiment using different amounts of resin while also changing the type of wax to make a bunch of products so that we can pick the best one. I did for ages to get the paper-making ratios right. For real? Gil asked in disbelief. Up until now, he had only ever had to follow the instructions to the letter, and he started to head back to the workshop to research with an exhausted look on his face. Once I had sent them off, I got to work reading through the remaining letters that the High Bishop had hidden in the book room. It turned out that they weren't all innocent love letters. In fact, quite a few looked pretty suspicious. Some concerned bribes, others involved under-the-table deals with nobles, and a bunch were requests for flower offerings. Oh, God. So Viscount Garlock was connected to the High Bishop. I knew it! Ferdinand had made me put a veil on before I could greet certain people during spring prayer, and I could see now most of them had connections to the High Bishop. I wrote up a list of people to be wary of as I continued reading the oh-so-suspicious-looking letters. I should probably show these to Ferdinand. Fran, please send word to him, as you wish. The letters could potentially prove useful in Sylvester or Ferdinand's future political endeavors. I wanted to keep the love letters hidden, though, so I put them back on the bookshelf. Ferdinand, I have something for you. I entered Ferdinand's room with Fran, who was carrying the box shaped to look like 4 books. He immediately gave it a dubious look. What in the world are these? They must not be normal books if you're bringing them here. They were books, stored in the bookshelf that only the High Bishop can open. Or so they appear. In reality, this is just a box that's been shaped to look like 4 books. Inside are a bunch of letters that serve as evidence of his crimes. Will they be of use to your plot with Sylvester? Ferdinand opened the book-shaped box and furrowed his brow. He took out a few letters, checked who they were from, and then gave an evil smirk. There certainly are a good number of these, Them all. All I ask is for the box. I love things like this, I said while pointing at the book-shaped box decoration with leathers and gemstones. Ferdinand dismissively waved his hand, an exasperated look on his face. All I desire are the contents. You may use the box as you wish. Just give me a moment to remove the letters. I thank you ever so much. At that, one of Ferdinand's attendants started packing the letters into a regular wooden box. Ferdinand stopped writing and set his pen aside, having apparently reached a stopping point in his work. Rosamund, is your schedule free for the rest of the today? Yes, I've received today's report from Gil and Lutz, and I've given them instructions. It seems that Haas's orphanage has started to show signs of progress. But in any case, do you need my help with something, I asked? Ferdinand shook his head and began to clean off his desk. No, I merely wish to continue your magic training as soon as possible. If you do not learn to create a high beast soon, then it won't be ready in time for the Harvest Festival. Follow me to the castle. Allow me to get changed then. I returned to my chambers and was changed from my High Bishop's robes to my noble clothing, wrapping a belt over the top that Ferdinand had given to me. Apparently, nobles needed belts to hang magic tools off of. The bald face stone that I had dyed of my mana had been embedded into a gold birdcage ornament similar to the ones worn by Ferdinand and other nobles, and was hanging from my belt. Shall we go, Lady Rosamund? Once Bridget had sent me on her high beast, we flew off toward the castle's magic training area. I would have to make my own high beast this time for sure. Ooh, here we go! Finishing my high beast and the wax stencils. When we arrived, Daniel and Bridget were instructed to train on the opposite side of the arena to us. I turned to face Ferdinand. As soon as they were gone, it's time to begin. Now then, start by changing the sides of your face stone to practice what you learned last time. And take care not to imagine it exploding this time, he said, reminding me of my past failure as a warning. I took out my face stone and tightly gripped it so as to not drop it. This time, as I changed its size, I imagined it as a sturdy bowling ball instead of something flimsy like a balloon. It wasn't long before I heard Ferdinand's voice again. Very good. Next, practice blocking its shape. Pour mana into it until it's the size you have imagined, and then stop. It should be quite easy for you to consciously halt the flow of your mana. Since I regularly stopped and started my flow of mana during the offerings to the divine instruments, this step was just as easy for me as Ferdinand had predicted. Once I was able to easily change the ball from the size of a ping pong ball to a basketball to a massive inflatable beach ball, Ferdinand told me that was enough. Now you will practice changing its shape. I turned the round face stone into a pyramid, then a cube, then a spiked pufferfish looking thing, then a book, and then a pen. It took me a while to form the shapes at first, but as I got used to the process, I became able to instantly turn the face stone into whatever I envisioned in my head. You truly are a fast learner, Ferdinand said, complimenting me in a tone that suggested a mix of both respect and exasperation. That was rare for him. Rosemine, this is your final task. Remove all unnecessary thoughts from your mind and imagine an animal that you can ride. When I tried to picture a rideable animal, the first things that came to mind was a bouncy, springy rides that could be found all over the amusement park, the kind that you could slide a coin in and then ride for 3 minutes. Once you have decided on a form, cut off your monitor to lock it. What in the world is that? Panda ride? Oh, God. Girl, you are stupid. It had a single seat and was pretty small. In fact, it was less like an amusement park ride and more like a toy that a toddler would sit on and move about with its feet. In other words, it was absolutely pathetic. While I sadly shook my head in my failed attempt, Ferdinand looked down at it with the thoroughly dubious eyes. Can this thing fly? I imagine that it would be a little difficult. It seems to me that a little is vast understatement. Ferdinand said while rubbing his temples. You are a fast learner, but your lack of common sense may never be improved. I personally had no idea where his criticisms were coming from, but he had asked me to make an animal ride, and I did. Okay, I made it a little bigger so you can tell it's rideable. No, focus on the shape before the size. Can you make a lion like this? Ferdinand said, asking, brushing a hand against his face stone and forming his high beast in the blink of an eye. Just seeing that made it clear how trained his movements were. I could only imagine how much practice it would take before I could do that myself. Ehrenfest's insignia is a lion, and the Archduke rides one that has 3 heads. Children of the Archduke tended to use lions as well. It's not mandatory, of course, but it is a long-standing tradition. I had assumed that Sylvester made a Cerberus-esque lion because he had the mind of a little boy who would like that kind of thing. But as it turned out, there was actually a lot more meaning behind it, and as his adopted daughter, I will be permitted to use a lion myself. Okay, I'll do my best. Ferdinand's high beast was so realistic that I found it kind of scary. So I wanted my own high beast to be a cute lion. I nodded, trying to picture a lion that I wouldn't mind riding on, then poured mana into my face stone. It swelled in size and actually took the shape of a lion this time. But to stride its growing as big as an amusement park ride would be, Ferdinand grimaced even harder than before. Your aesthetic senses are catastrophically poor. What foul manner of beast have you summoned in place of a lion? What, foul? This is pretty cute in my opinion. I had made a lion to ride on as requested, but my cartoony take was apparently no good in Ferdinand's eyes. Can you even ride that thing? I mean, I could try. I climbed onto its back and successfully grabbed the steering wheel I had made in place of reins, but it didn't move like I had thought it would. Well, that wasn't quite true. It only moved like I thought it would, since it moved based on my thoughts. Girl, that's not what he meant. I had envisioned it as an amusement park ride, and with that in mind, I couldn't get it up into the air at all. My best efforts to move its feet just caused it to shuffle very slowly. That was a big problem. No matter how hard I thought, I just couldn't work out the motions to make an animal fly. It didn't feel like it would be leaving the ground anytime soon. A lion I can ride, but one that can also fly through the sky, I remembered to myself deep in thought. Lions were a bit different from cats, but I had a feeling that I could make a flying high beast by copying what I had seen in that one famous movie with the cat bus running along power lines. It was one fast bus, definitely one that could run through the sky. No! Girl, why are you being difficult? Just use an animal. Just use an existing animal. Heck, there's a freaking bunny one out there somewhere. The high beast that I actually ended up making was pretty heavily influenced by thoughts of cats. So the lion bus ended up looking less like a lion and more like a cat with a shower hat for a mane, but oh well, what in the world is that? As you can see, it's a lion bus. I stood in front of the lion bus and a window dropped down to form an entrance for me. I climbed inside, joy swelling in my heart because it had moved exactly as I had imagined, and saw there was a steering wheel and a driver's seat right by the entrance. These parts had probably been made based on my subconscious knowledge of cars, and perhaps due to me having owned a driver's license back in my Arano days, the area around the driver's seat was more detailed than the outside of the bus. Incidentally, I only knew how to drive automatic cars. The lion bus also had a seatbelt so that I wouldn't have to worry about falling out. I mean, if it's a freaking bus, you're going to have a hard time falling out of it. Unless you fall out of the driver's seat. and I had a feeling that it would probably be pretty warm in here even during the winter. That is a waste of mana. Make it smaller, Ferdinand said from outside the bus. I tried shrinking it a little, and the microbus-sized high beast became as small as a one-person car. It had a lion head and legs just like before. Rosemine, the form of your high beast is highly irregular. Will it truly be able to fly? I'll give it a try. I sat down on the driver's seat and fastened my seatbelt, then gripped the steering wheel and poured a bit of mana into it. As I pressed the accelerator, the lion's feet started to move. Wow, it moved! I drove laps around the practice area, then thought, fly, while pulling the top of the steering wheel toward me. The lion's head pointed upward as the whole thing lifted off the ground like a plane, and my body was pushed against the seat as it steadily gained height. Whoa, it's flying! Wow, I can't wait to see this animated. It's gonna be freaking insane. It seemed that I could fly around by changing the angle of the steering wheel, and I made it all the way up to the ceiling of the training building. How was that, Ferdinand? I think it's pretty good, I said, proudly puffing out my chest once I had gotten out of my lion bus. Ferdinand just looked perturbed. Do you truly intend to ride that? Absolutely. I can make it smaller when I was alone, or bigger when I needed more people. It would be perfect for any situation, not to mention much safer than most high beasts as there was no risk of anybody falling off. And of course, it was infinitely cuter and more functional than Ferdinand's scary realistic lion. If you insist on riding that, then I ask that you change the animal you're basing it on. I would rather that bizarre creature not be associated with Ehrenfest's lion. Oh, what? But it's so cute, I said, looking at my lion bus. Ferdinand simply furrowed his brow as he followed my gaze before marking it off as, quote, unquote, not beautiful. Well, whatever you say, I guess I'll take this opportunity to make it even cuter. I repeat that your aesthetic sense is unnatural and will never produce anything even remotely close to cute. He sure was being mean over our taste being just a little different. In fact, he was being so mean that I wanted to make it even cuter than I was planning on out of spite. What is this, a fey beast? It looks entirely like a large grun. If this really is the route you wish to take, then at least model it after a shoe mill. That will make it easier for other nobles to accept. What's a shoe mill? I've never seen one, so that's out of the question. And no, it's not a grun or whatever, it's a red panda. Don't you think its lovable face and bushy tail are just adorable? Not in the least. There apparently existed a fey beast here that resembled a red panda, also known as a lesser panda back in Japan. But given that fey beast sounded scary, I would rather red pandas not be associated with them. Ferdinand ignored my protest and continued to glare at my high beast, then pointed sharply at its tail. That tail will do nothing but get in the way, at least make it half as long. Oh no, you named it! No way. Don't ask me to cut off Leslie's tail, that's too cruel. You've named it now? But regardless, the tail is a waste of mana. What purpose does it serve? We stared each other down for a bit. I ultimately did cut the tail down to half as long, but I managed to secure the bus shape for my high beast. Thus, the panda bus was born. Now then, let us return to the temple at once. You will be riding your own high beast. After a bit more practice in the room, we went back to the temple on our high beasts. We stayed pretty low as we flew over the noble's quarter, just in case I did fall. Rosemine, you're going too slowly. Okay, what? I stepped on the accelerator to go faster, and the panda bus shot up to an incredible speed. I reflexively pulled my foot away, which cut off my mana like an emergency brake. Eep! Driving a mana-powered high beast was nothing like driving a normal car, and it was surprisingly tough to keep the flow of my mana consistent. We ended up arriving at the temple before I had mastered the art of slowly putting my mana into the high beast so that I could maintain a steady speed while flying. My guard knights had followed behind us with their shining wands at the ready just in case my panda bus were to fail, and once they had confirmed that I had landed safely, they made their staffs and high beast disappear. Your struggles are due to your sizable amount of mana. It will no doubt be hard for you to fly while you're still figuring out how to execute minor mana adjustments. But only through struggling will you learn. Practice to the best of your ability such that you will be able to fly comfortably before the harvest festival. Okay, I said, my shoulders slumped in sorrow over my failure. Well, I mean, you did do it a lot better than I expected. I figured you'd take a bit before you made a high beast. Ferdinand cleared his throat. Ahem. You mastered this faster than I expected. I imagine that you will have at least a little time to read over the coming days. Really? From there, I spent my days practicing to fly my high beast, organizing the book room, learning the Harspiel under Rosina, practicing the prayers for the summer coming-of-age ceremony, and autumn baptism ceremony, and doing other such matters. At times, an ordinance would fly in to announce a lunch meeting regarding the concert. These were attended by Elvira, who was acting as the lead director, Eckert, who was the head of security, and Cornelius, who had wormed his way in under the justification that he was my guard. Karstedt was able to enjoy Hugo's cooking since he ate in the castle with Sylvester, but meals in the night dorms were made by another chef. So Lampreth had started coming to the temple on his days off for lunch and sweets. In short, my attendants would be given no time to rest until our head chef had finished his training, and when I saw how nervous Nicola got whenever she was serving nobles, I couldn't help but feel a little bad. It was the evening, 5 days before Ferdinand's concert. While I was cataloging the books in the book room, Gil came rushing in, his eyes shining. Lady Rosemine, Zack finished his wax coating machine. I thought you would like to see it. I speedily put away my half-completed catalog, then went to the workshop with Gil and Daniel at once. I instructed the Grey Priest to continue their work as usual, then called out to Lutz and Zack, who were talking about something as they looked over the machine. Good day, Zack. I was informed that you had finished the wax-cutting machine. It's right here, milady. Sitting on the work table was a machine just small enough for adults to carry with both hands. Lutz was already preparing to melt some wax onto it, and there was a trauma paper ready nearby. Impressed by how effectively Mark had educated Lutz, I peered at the machine by myself. Please take care not to touch the machine, Lady Rosemine. The flame has been lit, so it's already quite hot. We'll be melting the wax here, and shall then move this part here like this to wax the paper, Lutz said in a ridiculously polite tone of voice as he raised his head. There was a neutral expression plastered over his face, but he was no doubt cackling on the inside. In that case, please cut the paper to be as large as my diptych, then run it through the machine. Lutz and Gil split the trauma paper between themselves and began cutting it into A6-size sheets. When they were doing that, I moved over to Johann, who was working silently some distance away. His machine looked a lot bigger and more complicated than Zack's, but I could tell that it perfectly matched the plans Zack had made. His ability to make things exactly as they were on a blueprint reminded me that indeed Johann's skills were top class. How's your machine coming along, Johann? Lady Rosemine, it's still a work in progress. It should take a couple more days, but I think it'll be exactly what you want. Zack's blueprints really are impressive, he said, with a fervent look in his eye as he took out a few more parts and started fitting them together. It was clear that he was focused on his work, so I moved away at once so as to not get in his way. We're ready, Lady Rosemine. Let's slide the paper between the rollers, which he then rotated by hand rather than using a crank. The core of each roller was made of wood, so while the metal parts heated up and got wax on them, the parts he was touching stayed reasonably cool. I think this should be appropriate for the size of paper that this workshop deals with, Zack said as he glanced over at the wax-cutting machine that Johann was making. Given that Zack's machine required the rollers to be moved by hand, it needed to stay small enough that anyone could use it. But he was right. Our workshop only dealt with A4-size paper for picture books, so the wax stencils didn't need to be that big. Plus, a small machine meant small rollers, and small rollers needed less melted wax to get the job done. She's upstairs! Now then, let's experiment using the wax that Lutz and Gil made to see what works best. Lutz and Gil had numbered and organized the various combinations of wax and resin that they had made prior to today. There were 3 types of wax, and each one had been mixed with 1 or 3 set amounts of pine resin, making for 9 combinations in total. I could guess that Lutz and Zack had tried out several kinds already, as they were working the machine and spreading the wax with experienced hands. Once they had coated 2 sheets with the first kind of wax, they cleaned the machine and got to work preparing the next kind. Once they were all done, the pieces of wax paper were presented to me. My job was to check the finished products and determine whether they were good enough to be used or not. Gil speedily handed me a file and a stylus, and I started cutting into the papers. This one seems usable enough. This one, not so much. It's too hard to cut. This one isn't any good either. It's a bit cracked. Oh, but this one is good. As expected, the wax had been evenly distributed thanks to the rollers, and it looked beautiful. It was pliable too thanks to the resin, meaning it didn't crack when cut into. In the end, I was able to pick the type of wax that seemed the easiest to use out of all the kinds presented to me. Now then, please make the wax copying the ratios that you use for this kind. I will need about 20 sheets of wax paper the size of picture book pages. Call Wilma tomorrow to begin cutting them into stencils. We shall be using mimeograph printing for the art. As you wish. Leaving the rest to Lutz and Gil, I looked up at Zack with a bright smile. Zack, thanks to you, I now have a finished wax cutting machine. Your accomplishments are fit for me to award you the title of Gutenberg. I ask that you work to spread printing alongside the others. Yes, my lady, thank you. Zack immediately knelt down, beaming with pride, but then quickly looked up with a confused expression. What do you mean by the others? I refer to your fellow Gutenbergs, of course. Johann and Zack, the smiths. Heidi and Joseph, the ink makers. Ingo the carpenter, and Benno and Lutz the merchants. Work as well than I think about it. Plus all those who work in the Rosemine workshop. They are all your Gutenberg allies. Zack looked over at Johann in search for an explanation, only to see his coworker hanging his head in abject desolation for some reason. He then looked rapidly between me and Johann. Hold on a second, what? Gutenberg isn't a title reserved for the best craftsman? It's a title award to all those involved in printing. From this day onward, you may proudly refer to yourself as a Gutenberg, I said. Not about to let someone as skilled as Zack escape my grasp. Zack simply blinked in confusion as I left the workshop. Behind me, I could hear Lutz say, I told you it wasn't anything special, between bursts of laughter, while Gil excitedly exclaimed, I'm a Gutenberg too! Keep up the good work, everyone. Upon returning to my chambers, I had Monica go and tell Wilma our plans for tomorrow. It was finally time to begin mimeograph printing, and I started writing down the steps and important notes about the process onto a board in preparation. Good morning, Lady Rosemine, Wilma said. Lutz and Gil had brought the file and stylus to the orphanage's dining hall, since she had said the tables there were easier to work on than the ones in the workshop. As Lutz waited for her to get ready, he read aloud the list of instructions that I had prepared, explaining about how the wax stencils cutting process went. Place the wax paper over the illustration, then lightly trace the stylus across it. A thin white line should appear where the stylus touched. Once the illustrations had been traced onto the wax paper, the next step was to cut the paper from the top of the film to form the stencil. The file will be fitted into a wooden frame, then the wax paper was placed over it and pinned to the frame using thin needles. In my Arano days, we had held it down with Scotch tape, but that didn't exist here, and thin needles were the next best thing. I will now begin, Wilma said nervously, taking the stylus and beginning to trace the illustration. That seemed easy enough for her, and she quickly finished without any problems. Next, she pinned the wax paper over the file and began cutting it with the stylus. These white parts will turn black when printed. There are styluses of many different thicknesses, so please use the best suited to the situation. Understood. Wilma was cutting in the illustration of Ferdinand sitting and playing the harpsichord. It went down to his knees so that the entire instrument could be seen, and unlike the full body illustrations we had used for the cutout stencil, this one showed his face in such great detail that you could immediately tell that it was him in the picture. He would no doubt be furious if he saw it. The light sound of scraping could be heard all around the hall. The Grey Priests watched on with interest at first, but once they realized that it would take a while before they returned to their workshop duties. Some children did the same, while the others continued watching Wilma work. Lutz, please go and check to see whether the printers are ready, I said once the wax stencil was almost finished. And Lutz nodded before leaving the dining hall. How is this, Lady Rosemine? Wilma asked, looking up from the stencil with a satisfied expression. In her hands was a beautiful illustration complete with shading that had been done using lines of various widths and intensities. It would probably look different once it was printed, but I could tell at a glance that it was well made. The ink-covered roller smoothly moved across the netting. When he pulled off the wooden frame, there was a beautifully printed illustration. The thin lines from Wilma's original picture were all clearly there, as was the shading. The printing had been a success, meaning that we'd now be able to produce a wider variety of art than we could using just the original cutout stencils. It's a success, Lady Rosemine. I could feel my heart leap with joy at the finished mimeograph print. We now had one more means of expression available to us. Illustrations weren't the only thing that this would let us print. Sheet music had been hard to slice out with cutters, but now it will be beyond simple to print. Now, Lady Rosemine, we finished the wax cutting machine and have used a lot of expensive paper to complete the wax stencils. Do you think we'll make a return on our investment? Lutz asked, holding up this art with a grin. The illustration was so stunning that there was no doubt in the world that we'd be making back more than we had invested. I looked at Lutz, Wilma, and everybody else in the workshop before giving a confident smile of my own. We surely will. Your expectations shall be met without fail. Oh! I have got to finish this! I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to end this off here, guys. I'll probably finish tomorrow. I'll see y'all next time.